Hey everybody, I'm Dr. Alyssa Watson.
And I'm Dr. Beth Molleson.
Thank you so much for joining us again in the Veterinary Breakroom. In the break room, we have short conversations about things going on in veterinary medicine. And today's conversation was actually inspired by our episode a couple weeks ago. A few weeks ago, Dr. Beth and I talked about monoclonal antibodies in the profession and how we've seen a real growth in that technology. And it got me thinking about just new treatments and new therapies in general, and whether or not we kind of, as veterinarians as a whole, certainly we're not a monolith, but do we think veterinarians are kind of like quick to adopt these innovations, or are we more cautious? Do we prefer to wait until more information is available? And do we think that that has changed either for ourselves or for veterinarians in general? So I actually have posed this question to the Clinicians Brief Facebook and Instagram audience in the past. And Beth, what do you think their response was? Do you think veterinarians overall are innovators or early adopters, or do you think that they are more cautious?
I would say stereotypically, I would say they are more cautious, but I'm curious to hear how people sort of, we all know we're not always the best at identifying ourselves. I'm curious to see how people sort of categorize themselves.
Yeah. So it was, well, so first off, on Instagram, when I posed this question, I did it as a poll very specifically because I didn't want to give people that option. I wanted this to be kind of a binary choice. Do you think of yourself as an early adopter, or do you think of yourself as a wait and see kind of person? And that was almost 50-50. It was almost 50-50 split, which was pretty cool. So I think 44% said early adopters and 56% said wait for colleagues. So a little over half are with you, Beth. They would rather wait and kind of see. It was funny because I thought it would be the other way. I thought veterinarians would be, more willing to, jump in and try things new. And maybe that's because that's how I consider myself, or at least I did early on in my career. It's another thing I kind of wanted to talk to you about today, Beth, is that as my career has progressed, I think I have become more cautious than I was early on in my career. And I think that there's several reasons for that. When I asked this question on Facebook, then the answers, ranged significantly. And we got a lot of people who said, hey, this depends, right? This is not a binary choice. This really depends. But it made me think, like, so what does it depend on? Like, what are the things that this depends on for me, for you, for the rest of our profession? So if you had to, characterize what are the things you think goes into this thought process, what are some major questions that you think we ask ourselves when we're deciding whether or not we want to adopt a new treatment?
Yeah, I think for me, I definitely would consider myself a late adopter. I don't like change. I feel like I get set in my ways. I also, but I definitely think, like you said, in reality, it isn't a binary question. There are so many nuances that force that to vary. So for me, I think it depends on what category of drug is it? What are we treating? Like if I'm faced with a situation where we're treating, it's a topical wipe or something like that. Am I more up for trying a new product? Yes, because maybe the stakes are lower. If you put me on something like an anesthesia drug where I've been using the same one for a decade and the stakes are really high, if I get that discipline point off, the stakes are high if I don't know what adverse events to expect. So I think it, of course, does really depend. So for me, I think it depends on what we're treating. That's the biggest one. I think, of course, it depends on whether or not we have colleagues that are using it. If we've seen other people use it, then of course maybe we're a little more likely to jump on board that train early. Um, and I think it depends a lot on the clients. Like that's my other thought is this client sort of an early adopter kind of person? Or are they someone who's going to expect me to know every possible, outcome or possibility, adverse event, give them a bunch of experience on how I've used the drug in the past? Then of course maybe I'm a little more likely to use an old trusted option. But what about you, Alyssa? What makes you say we're an earlier adopter, but maybe trending toward the opposite now?
So a lot of the things that you just brought up, yeah. And when I sat down and talked about this, it really came down to what, you were just explaining. And to me, that's like inherent risk tolerance. But when we're talking about risk tolerance, just like you said, it's not only my personal risk tolerance, it's my personal risk tolerance, it's the risk tolerance of the practice, right? The practice I'm in, because I don't own my own practice, so I'm not solely responsible for purchasing and, keeping something on the shelf, although, oftentimes we'll have recommendations. So I do think that there are practices that are generally more forward thinking and more into innovation, and are quicker to order and try out new therapies, and that can really affect a practitioner's choice. And then the third one, just like you mentioned, which until I really sat down and thought about it, I would not have even dreamed that this factored into my decision making, but the risk tolerance and the relationship I have with the client, just like you were
Mhm.
saying. If I have a client that's a really good client that I've been seeing their animals, maybe multiple animals, that they've had. I mean, I've been in practice over 20 years. And so sometimes I've gone through a couple, different generations of pets with people. And if it's a very good client and I've seen them, I'm much more willing to say, hey, there's this new thing out there, I haven't used it yet, do you want to come on this journey with me? I'm not going to know everything about this drug. I'm going to do everything that I can, to make sure that I know the very, very important things. But there's going to be things that are, unknown, and that's one of the cons of being somebody who adopts early. There's going to be unknown side effects, there is lack of long-term data. And
Mhm.
so you're kind of spending that client trust capital, that capital, trust capital that you've built up with that client. And I'm much more cautious now about who how we do that. And I think a lot of that, unfortunately, is, the new reality of practice with the internet and the ability of people to, really broadcast fairly anonymously their anger, as well as any kind of perceived adverse event.
Mhm.
A lot of these drugs very quickly become kind of famous for potential side effects, whether or not they're serious, or life threatening. And they can sometimes be blown out of proportion, or stressed in some of these online groups. And so I think that that's
Sure.
something that's changed my willingness to adopt some of these therapies early. I don't know. Do you feel that way?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, for me, I think the biggest factor that I keep coming back to really is the patient and what I'm up against. If I'm treating a melanoma, I'm a lot more likely to jump in headfirst into using a monoclonal antibody that maybe I have zero experience with because we have no other options, rather than just using an example of canine OA. We have a first line therapy and NSAIDs that we've been using for decades and decades. Maybe I'm a little more hesitant to jump into a different line of drugs. So for me, that's sort of what I keep coming back to. I know you also sort of talked about this in human medicine. And for me, it is yeah, I do think veterinarians get the rap of maybe being a little hesitant to change or later adopters when it comes to pharmaceuticals or any sort of medical technology or things like that. But I think about what a different environment we're in than our human counterparts. We're so often they are surrounded by many other physicians and experts. Their drug sales reps are in their office all the time. I just feel like they're in a completely different support system when it comes to trying something new. Their level of expertise is so much more specialized that they can sort of invest in understanding all of these different drugs. And of course, we often, as general practitioners, are asked to be jack of all trades. It's impossible to keep up with every new drug, every possible side effect of every new drug, every case use of every new drug in a busy clinic. And so I think for me, that is probably one of the things that leads to me, even if as I'm wanting to maybe be a little more aggressive in my adoption, those are hurdles that I think we all still face.
Yeah. I think another thing for me, I do some part-time hospice and end of life care now. And that also has made me just a little bit more hesitant, but I'm absolutely 100% positive that that is, population bias. Just like you said, a lot of these things practitioners are trying them because there either
Mhm.
isn't anything else, to treat this condition, or everything else has already failed, and so then, if you're at that stage in a disease process or in an animal's life, end stage mobility issues or things like that, and then you try one of these newer therapies and it doesn't work out, I'm more likely to hear about that from the clients that, I service now than I would have been
Sure.
before, I think. And so I'm
Right.
sure that plays a significant role in a lot of the stories that I hear. But it does oftentimes give me I get a little anxious and I'm like, oh, I'm not sure I'm going to, try that one when I'm back in the clinic. And that's probably
Right.
not fair.
Right. I
I
say I'm
will.
sure you're
Yeah.
hearing a lot of horror stories when your patient population is what is what it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
Um, And yeah, I think some of the things we can do to maybe if we are sort of wanting to be early adopters for the sake of benefiting our patients is I know for me, like talking to trusted experts where it's like, okay, I can read on the package insert what the likely side effects might be, but I'm probably not going to feel comfortable until I talk to maybe a specialist and hear what are sort of the real world side effects, what are they seeing. So taking the initiative to gather that sort of information, just doing more education when you do hear about new things coming out, I think is sort of the key for me, rather than just, using the excuse of not having enough time and just waiting for it to be sort of well established before I'm willing to take the plunge on something.
Yeah, and I do think that it's important to really highlight that there are advantages, in to your professional satisfaction and your well-being of being an early adopter. These things can lead to hope for some of these refractory cases. And not only is that wonderful for your patient, but it feels good for you too. I mean, think of all of the patients that have benefited from these new FIP drugs. I mean,
Hmm.
just a few years ago, that was a completely fatal diagnosis, and things have changed completely. And how wonderful it is. I always remember, anytime I had a young cat come in with a belly full of fluid, and I tapped it, and I was pretty sure we were dealing with FIP, that it's mentally difficult to know that we don't have anything to offer them, and so to have that changed is fantastic. And so I do think that there are wonderful pros to being an early adopter. We just need to, again, like we said, sit down and figure out why, what are the main factors behind our decision, and make sure that we're making them for all the right reasons and maybe not letting
Yes,
some of our personal bias come in.
absolutely. Yeah. A fine line between sort of feeling like you have all the information you need to jump in versus withholding something that really could help our patients. So, well, Alyssa, I think that might bring us to our win of the week. Do you have any wins this week?
I'm gonna have a personal win this week, if that's
Great.
okay. I was rushing to get back and sit down and prepare for this podcast because my youngest son was chosen as athlete of the month. So my youngest son he just started middle school, and it's about halfway through the first year already. I don't know where this school year is going, but he was one of 3 sixth graders to get on the flag football team at his middle school. So it's 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And then he was chosen as athlete of the month. So even though, he didn't start very many games and he didn't take very many snaps, his coach was really proud of him for always being out there and encouraging the team. And I do think that he has a really good future in flag football, and I'm so excited
That's
for
so
it.
fun. Has he played before, or sixth grade
Yeah.
just when kids start? Okay.
He had played before in a private league, but this is the first time he's played like for his school team, and he was so excited and representing his school. It was really
How
cool to
fun.
see.
Oh, that's awesome. My win is going to be, and I was really struggling, so I'm glad I remembered this. My daughter and I had a bake sale this weekend, which she was had a random day off school last week, and I was struggling with what to do with her. So we baked a ton of cookies, sugar cookies, and then we iced them. And then we set up a bake sale this weekend on our
Can
bike trail that's right by our house.
can we just stop for just a second, Beth? Because you didn't just ice them. You iced them so cute and put little eyes and smiley faces on them. I saw pictures and I love these cookies. I was
Thank
so
you,
sad that you're
Alyssa.
so far away.
I appreciate you're a cookie fan girl. I know they have like the royal icing for anybody else who's a cookie nerd. So they're like the really pretty polished icing, and the downside is they're a labor of love. They take a long time to do, but they are fun to do every once in a while. And we were doing them for a good cause. We set up our bake sale to raise money for the Free Store Food Bank. So I'm considering it a win. We raised a decent amount of money in our neighborhood. My daughter, of course, kept complaining that she was bored. And I was like, you're supposed to be bored. This isn't supposed to be fun. We're raising money for the Free Store Food Bank. So a little bit of tough love parenting was in there too, which I'm also going to consider a win. But no, it was fun. We had a beautiful day and sold all of our cookies. So that's going to be my community win for the week.
I love it. I think that is the best win. Well, thanks for sitting down and talking to me about being an early adopter versus a wait and see kind of person. And for everybody at home, thanks so much for joining us on the break room. If there's anything you ever want to hear about, drop us a line and we'll be happy to talk about it. Thanks for joining us in the Veterinary Break Room. If you enjoyed today's episode, you can find us wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, including a video version on YouTube. While you're there, make sure you subscribe, rate, and review us. You can also listen to or watch our podcast episodes on our website at cliniciansbrief.com/podcasts. Or drop us a line at podcasts@instinct.vet. Veterinary Break Room is an Instinct Science production produced by Alexis Ussery and co-hosted by Alyssa Watson, Beth Molleson, and Katie Berlin.